He left her for a younger, wealthier model, calling her simple, boring, and a dead weight on his ambition. He thought he had won, that he had traded up and left his old life in the dust. But at the city's most exclusive charity gala, as he proudly paraded his polished new wife, he was forced to watch, frozen in utter disbelief, as the most powerful and enigmatic billionaire in the country took his ex-wife in his arms and kissed her in front of everyone. This isn't just a story of revenge. This is the story of how Elara Vance went from being a forgotten memory to an unforgettable masterpiece, and how one single kiss didn't just shatter her ex-husband's night, it shattered his entire world. The scent of rain-soaked earth and blooming petunias was Elara Vance's sanctuary. 3 years after the implosion of her marriage, this little flower shop, Bloom and Quill, was the one place she felt entirely whole. The bell above the door was her doorbell, the gentle hum of the refrigerated display her background music, and the delicate task of coaxing life from soil her therapy. Her divorce from Mark Sterling hadn't been just a separation. It had been an amputation. For 12 years, she had been Mrs. Sterling, the supportive wife of a rising star in the corporate finance world. She'd managed their home, hosted his networking dinners, edited his reports late into the night, and put her own dreams of botanical illustration on an indefinite hold. She believed in him. In them. Then, one crisp autumn evening, he came home and announced it was over. The words he used were like surgical steel, precise and utterly devoid of warmth. "I've outgrown this, Elara. I'm aiming for the stratosphere, and you're content to stay on the ground. You're too simple." The stratosphere had a name. Chloe Jensen. She was the 26-year-old daughter of a real estate mogul, with a flawless Instagram feed, a portfolio of her father's properties to manage, and the kind of ruthless ambition that mirrored Mark's own. Within 6 months of the divorce papers being signed, they were married. Elara saw the photos online, a lavish ceremony in the Hamptons, a honeymoon in Bora Bora. Mark looked ecstatic, reborn. Elara felt erased. The first year was a blur of grief. The second was about survival, taking the modest divorce settlement and investing it all into this tiny shop. Now, in the 3rd year, she was finally beginning to feel the first tendrils of a new life. Her hands, once soft and manicured for Mark's corporate events, were now often smudged with soil, with tiny cuts from thorns and wires. She had never felt more like herself. "You're staring at that orchid like it owes you money," a cheerful voice broke her reverie. Elara looked up, a faint smile touching her lips. "Sorry, Sarah. Just thinking." Her best friend, Sarah Chen, a sharp-witted journalist who had been her rock through the divorce, leaned against the counter, holding 2 envelopes. "Thinking about him again?" Elara sighed, snipping a dead leaf from a fern. "It's hard not to. His face is plastered on the cover of Boston Finance Monthly. Mark Sterling, the man with the Midas touch." "More like the man with the morals of a hyena," Sarah scoffed, sliding one of the envelopes across the counter. It was thick, cream-colored cardstock with embossed silver lettering. "Speaking of hyenas and their natural habitats, this came for you. I picked up your mail." Elara's heart did a nervous little flutter as she read the inscription. The Starlight Foundation Annual Charity Gala. It was the social event of the year, a place where Boston's old money and new tech titans collided. A single ticket cost more than her shop's weekly profit. "Why would I get this?" Elara murmured, tracing the elegant script. "Because I nominated Bloom and Quill to be a potential floral vendor for next year's event," Sarah said, beaming. "They send an invitation to all potential partners as a professional courtesy. You need to go, Elara. You need to get out there, network, and show people your talent. Ilara's stomach twisted. A room full of people like Mark and his new circle? People who judged worth by stock portfolios and designer labels? I don't think so, Sarah. That's not my world anymore. It never really was. That's exactly why you have to go, Sarah insisted, her voice passionate. You're not going as Mark Sterling's quiet, forgotten ex-wife. You're going as Ilara Vance, the owner of the most enchanting botanical boutique in the city. You need to walk into that lion's den and remind yourself that you are the lion, not the lamb. Ilara hesitated, the invitation feeling heavy in her hand. The thought of potentially seeing Mark, of seeing him with her, was nauseating. He had a way of looking at her now, a mixture of pity and mild embarrassment that made her skin crawl. He saw her little shop, her simple life, as confirmation that he'd made the right choice. Leaving the grounded woman behind had allowed him to soar. He'll be there, Ilara said softly, the words tasting like ash. He's on the junior board of the foundation. He'll be there with Chloe. Good, Sarah said, her eyes flashing. Let him see you. Not the heartbroken woman he left, but the incredible woman who is building a beautiful life from the rubble he created. Wear the dress. Hold your head high. And for God's sake, let them see that your life didn't end when he walked out the door. It began. The bell above the door chimed again, and a delivery man brought in a fresh shipment of Dutch tulips. As Ilara unpacked the vibrant, resilient flowers, Sarah's words echoed in her mind. Maybe she was right. For 2 years, she had hidden, healing in the quiet solitude of her shop. Maybe it was time to step back into the sun. Not for Mark, but for herself. To prove, if only to the ghost in her own memory, that she was more than just the woman he left behind. She was the woman who had learned to bloom on her own. She took a deep breath, the scent of fresh tulips filling her lungs like courage. Okay, she whispered. I'll go. The week leading up to the gala was a quiet storm of anxiety and resolve. Ilara found the perfect dress in a small vintage boutique Sarah had recommended. It wasn't a flashy designer gown like the ones Chloe would favor. It was an elegant, floor-length creation of deep forest green silk that clung to her silhouette in a way that was sophisticated rather than overt. It made her hazel eyes seem greener, and it felt like a second skin, a suit of armor woven from fabric. As she got ready on the night of the gala, she stared at her reflection. The woman looking back was different from the one Mark had left. There were fine lines of worry and hard work around her eyes, but there was also a strength in her gaze that hadn't been there before. She wasn't the pliant, eager-to-please girl anymore. She was a business owner, a survivor. Driving to the venue, a sprawling historic museum in the heart of the city, her hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel. She had to repeat Sarah's words like a mantra. You are the lion, not the lamb. The museum was breathtaking, its grand hall transformed into a celestial wonderland. A canopy of thousands of twinkling fairy lights glittered above, mimicking a starry night sky. The air buzzed with the murmur of 100 conversations, the clinking of champagne glasses, and the soft strains of a string quartet. And everywhere there were flowers, peonies, roses, and hydrangeas in shades of cream and blush overflowed from massive urns. Ilara felt a pang of professional envy and admiration. The arrangements were stunning. For the first hour, she managed to stay on the periphery, a ghost at the feast. She nursed a glass of champagne, observed the city's elite in their natural habitat, and felt a familiar wave of alienation. This world of superficial pleasantries and calculated connections was the world she had gladly left behind. Then she saw them. Mark stood near the grand staircase, looking impossibly handsome in a tailored Tom Ford tuxedo. On his arm was Chloe. She was poured into a glittering, silver-sequined dress that left little to the imagination. Her blonde hair was styled in a sleek, severe bob, and a diamond necklace glittered at her throat. They were a power couple, a portrait of modern success, laughing with a city councilman and a tech CEO. Ilara's breath hitched. She tried to turn, to melt back into the shadows, but it was too late. Mark's eyes scanned the room and locked onto hers. For a split second, a flicker of something unreadable crossed his face. Surprise? Confusion? Then it was gone, replaced by his usual mask of cool, confident amusement. He leaned down and whispered something to Chloe. Her perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose, and she turned, her gaze sweeping over Ilara with a dismissive air, from her simple updo to the hem of her vintage dress. They began to walk towards her. Every instinct screamed at Ilara to flee, but Sarah's voice echoed in her head. "Hold your head high." She straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and held her ground. "Well, well, Ilara," Mark said, his voice smooth but with an undercurrent of condescension she knew all too well. "I have to say, I'm surprised to see you here. This isn't exactly your usual scene." "Hello, Mark. Chloe," Ilara replied, her own voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil in her chest. "It's a beautiful event." Chloe gave a tight, practiced smile. "It is. The Starlight Foundation does such important work. Mark is on the fundraising committee, of course. He raised over $2 million this quarter alone." She placed a possessive hand on his arm, her diamond rings flashing under the lights. The subtext was clear. "He is important. He is with me." "What are you?" "That's wonderful," Ilara said politely, refusing to take the bait. Mark's eyes roamed over her, a critical glint in their depths. "That's a lovely dress. Very you. Did you make it yourself?" It was a deliberate jab, a callback to the hobbies he used to belittle, the sewing and gardening he deemed unambitious. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. He wasn't just trying to be polite, he was actively trying to diminish her, to put her back in the simple box he'd created for her. Before Ilara could formulate a response, Chloe chimed in, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Oh, Mark, be nice. I think it's sweet that Ilara has her little hobbies. The flower shop must be so quaint. Does it keep you busy?" Quaint. Little. The words were designed to sting, to frame her life's work as a childish pastime. The heat of humiliation rose in Ilara's cheeks. She felt small, exposed, just as they intended. She opened her mouth to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. She was 25 again, standing in their old kitchen, trying to defend her dreams to a man who had already decided they were worthless. "It's more than a hobby," she finally managed, her voice barely a whisper. Mark chuckled, a low, patronizing sound. "Of course. Look, it was interesting seeing you, Ilara. We have to go mingle. The mayor is expecting us." He gave her a final, pitying glance and steered Chloe away, leaving Ilara standing alone in their wake. The grand hall suddenly felt cold and suffocating. The twinkling lights seemed to mock her, and the murmur of conversation sounded like a judgment. Sarah was wrong. She wasn't a lion. She was just an intruder, a ghost from a past life that everyone else, especially Mark, had moved on from. She turned, her one goal now to find the exit and escape before the tears brimming in her eyes could fall. Fighting the lump in her throat, Ilara bypassed the crowded main hall and slipped into a quieter, adjoining gallery. The museum had kept this wing open for the event, and it was filled with Renaissance portraits. The faces of long-dead nobles, captured in oil and time, stared down at her with serene indifference. It was a comfort. She wasn't looking where she was going when she nearly bumped into a man standing before a large, dramatic floral arrangement in the corner of the room. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she mumbled, stepping back. "Not at all," a deep, calm voice replied. "I was the one blocking the path. I was just admiring this." Ilara looked from the man to the arrangement. It was a stunning, asymmetrical cascade of deep burgundy peonies, white anemones with dark centers, and delicate trailing jasmine vines. It was dramatic, melancholic, and beautiful. It was also one of hers. The gala's lead florist, a woman Ilara admired, had suffered a supply chain disaster a few days prior. A specific, rare variety of anemone hadn't arrived. Knowing Ilara cultivated them in her shop's small private greenhouse, she had called in a panic. Ilara had provided the flowers and, at the florist's request, had come in early to help assemble a few of the more artistic pieces in the quieter galleries, a small contribution she was proud of, but had no intention of advertising. "It's incredible, isn't it?" the man continued, his gaze still on the flowers. "Most arrangements at these things are so generic, safe. This one has a soul, it tells a story. Passion and a bit of sorrow, I think." Ilara was taken aback. He saw it. He saw exactly what she had been trying to convey. Yes. The contrast between the dark peonies and the white anemones is meant to be jarring but beautiful. He finally turned to look at her, and Ilara felt a jolt of recognition. She didn't know him personally, but she had seen his face in the same magazines that featured Mark. This was Julian Croft. He was a tech titan, a self-made billionaire who had built a revolutionary AI company from his college dorm room. He was notoriously private, rarely photographed, and known for his intellect and slightly eccentric nature. He wasn't wearing a classic tuxedo, but a bespoke suit of dark charcoal wool, no tie, with the top button of his crisp white shirt undone. He had sharp, intelligent eyes the color of grey slate, and a quiet intensity that was the polar opposite of Mark's slick, performative charisma. "You speak about it like an artist describing their own work," he observed, a slight knowing smile playing on his lips. Ilara felt a blush creep up her neck. "I'm a florist. I know," he said simply. "Ilara Vance, Bloom and Quill, your shop on Willow Street." Her eyes widened in surprise. How do you know that?" "I make it my business to know who the true artisans in this city are," Julian explained, his gaze warm and direct. "I've been following your shop's Instagram account for months. Your work is exceptional. You don't just arrange flowers, you compose them." He gestured back to the display. "This is your work, isn't it? The lead florist, Maria, is brilliant, but this piece has your signature touch, the asymmetry, the emotional depth. I recognized it immediately." Ilara was speechless. For years, her passion had been dismissed as a little hobby. Mark had once laughed when she'd called herself an artist. Yet here was one of the most brilliant minds in the country, not only recognizing her work, but articulating its value better than she ever could. Thank you," she stammered, feeling a genuine smile, the first of the night, spread across her face. "That means a great deal." "The pleasure is all mine," Julian said. "It's a relief to find something authentic in a room so full of performance." His eyes held hers, and in them she saw a shared sentiment, a mutual distaste for the gilded cage around them. "Tell me, Miss Vance, what story were you telling with this one?" For the next 20 minutes, Ilara forgot she was at the gala. She forgot about Mark and Chloe. She spoke with Julian Croft about the language of flowers, about the delicate process of cultivating rare blooms, about the way a simple arrangement could evoke a powerful emotion. He listened with rapt attention, asking insightful questions, his intelligence matched only by his genuine curiosity. He didn't just hear her, he understood her. From across the hall, Mark Sterling was watching. He had been schmoozing with a potential investor when he noticed Ilara talking to someone in the gallery. He squinted, trying to place the man's face. He looked familiar, but he wasn't one of the usual finance guys or real estate developers. He was dressed more simply, yet he carried himself with an aura of unshakable confidence that Mark found irritating. "Who is that with Ilara?" he asked Chloe, nodding in their direction. Chloe followed his gaze, her lips thinning. "I have no idea. Probably some low-level academic or a starving artist she feels sorry for. Honestly, Mark, why are you even looking over there? It's embarrassing." But Mark couldn't look away. There was something about the way the man was listening to Ilara, the way she was smiling, a real, radiant smile he hadn't seen on her face in years, that sparked a flicker of an unpleasant, unfamiliar emotion. It wasn't jealousy, not really. It was annoyance, an affront to his narrative. Ilara was supposed to be the sad, simple ex-wife, living a sad, simple life. She wasn't supposed to be here, looking beautiful in a green dress, captivating the attention of whoever that was. He felt an irrational urge to walk over there, to re-establish the hierarchy. He needed to remind her, and the stranger, of her place in his story. A footnote. "Come on," he said to Chloe, a predatory gleam in his eye. "Let's go say hello properly." As Mark and Chloe approached, the warm, comfortable bubble that had formed around Ilara and Julian instantly popped. Ilara's smile faltered, and the familiar tension coiled in her stomach. Julian noticed the shift immediately, his gaze moving from Ilara's suddenly guarded expression to the couple descending upon them. "Ilara, darling, you're hiding in the corner," Chloe trilled, her voice a weapon sheathed in velvet. "And you've made a friend." She cast a dismissive look at Julian, her eyes cataloguing his lack of a tie and the understated quality of his suit. Her assessment was swift and brutal. Not important. "We were just discussing the floral arrangements," Ilara said, her tone more reserved than before. Mark clapped a hand on Julian's shoulder in a gesture of forced, alpha male familiarity. Julian's posture remained utterly unchanged, his stillness a stark contrast to Mark's aggressive bonhomie. "Mark Sterling," he announced, extending a hand to Julian. "I'm Ilara's ex-husband. I hope she hasn't been boring you with talk about flowers. It's a sweet little passion of hers, but it can be a bit..." One note. Julian didn't take his hand. Instead, he met Mark's gaze with a cool, level stare. "On the contrary," Julian said, his voice quiet but carrying an undeniable weight. "I've found the conversation to be more intellectually stimulating than any I've had all evening. True artistry is never boring, Mr. Sterling." The polite rebuff, the refusal to shake his hand, caught Mark off guard. A flush of anger crept up his neck. He was Mark Sterling. People were eager to shake his hand. He dropped his arm, forcing a laugh. "Artistry. That's a generous term for it. I always tried to encourage her to find a more substantial career, something with a future. But you know, some people are content with small things." He looked directly at Ilara as he said it, each word a carefully aimed dart, meant to remind her of every argument, every belittling comment he'd ever made. Ilara felt the sting, but this time, something was different. Having Julian there, a man who had just validated her life's work with more sincerity than Mark had shown in 12 years of marriage, gave her a sliver of fortitude. "My small thing makes me happy, Mark," she said, her voice clear and firm, which is more than some people can say for their substantial careers. The direct hit surprised Mark into a moment of silence. Chloe, however, stepped in immediately, her smile becoming a predatory baring of teeth. "Oh, of course. Happiness is what's most important," she said, her tone making the word sound like a consolation prize for losers. "But one does have to be realistic. I'm just so glad Mark found a partner who could keep up with him, who shares his drive. We're closing on our 3rd home next month. In Aspen. It's so difficult to find a place with the right kind of energy, you know? It was a blatant, vulgar display of wealth, designed to make Alara feel impoverished in every sense of the word. And it was working. Alara felt a wave of exhaustion. She didn't want to fight. She just wanted to leave. Julian had been watching the entire exchange with the quiet, analytical focus of a predator studying its prey. He saw the calculated cruelty in their words, the way they worked as a team to isolate and diminish Alara. He saw the flicker of pain in Alara's eyes, but also the resilient strength she held on to. "Aspen is lovely," Julian said, his tone deceptively mild, "though I find the social scene there to be a bit loud. Too much performance, not enough substance, much like some conversations." He let his gaze drift pointedly between Mark and Chloe. The insult was so elegantly delivered that it took them a second to register it. Mark's face hardened, his mask of civility finally cracking. This stranger, this no-name in a plain suit, was defending Alara. He was mocking him. The audacity was infuriating. He decided to end it, to land a final, crushing blow that would put Alara and her mysterious defender in their place for good. He turned to Alara, his voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial tone, loud enough for Julian to hear. "You know, Alara, I do worry about you sometimes," he said, feigning concern. "Living alone, with just that little shop. I hope you're not getting your hopes up here." He gestured vaguely at Julian. "This isn't your world. You were never meant for it. You were always better off in the background, tending to your garden. It's where you belong." The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. "It's where you belong." He wasn't just insulting her. He was passing a life sentence. He was defining her reality, putting her in a cage built from his own dismissive perception of her. It was the cruelest thing he had ever said, a distillation of a decade of condescension. Alara felt the air leave her lungs. The blood drained from her face. She saw the flash of triumph in Mark's eyes, the smug satisfaction on Chloe's face. They had won. They had broken through her armor and found the soft, vulnerable place underneath. But before she could retreat, before the tears could form, Julian Croft moved. He stepped slightly in front of her, a subtle, protective gesture. He looked at Mark, and for the first time that night, the calm detachment in his eyes was replaced by a glint of something cold and sharp, like fractured ice. "You're wrong," Julian said, his voice dangerously soft. "You have no idea where she belongs." And then he turned to Alara, his expression softening as his gaze met hers. He gently cupped her cheek, his thumb stroking her skin. The entire gallery seemed to fade away. There was only the warmth of his hand and the startling intensity in his eyes. "He's blind to the masterpiece standing in front of him," Julian murmured, his voice for her alone. "But I see it. I see you." Then, as Mark and Chloe watched, utterly bewildered, Julian Croft leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of explosive, cinematic passion. It was something far more potent. It was deliberate, gentle, and profoundly affirming. It was a statement. Julian's lips were soft against hers, a silent communication that spoke of respect, admiration, and a deep, startling connection. In that single, breathtaking moment, Elara felt every wound Mark had ever inflicted on her spirit begin to close. The shame, the feeling of being small and insignificant, it all dissolved in the quiet intensity of that kiss. When he pulled back, the entire world seemed to rush back in, but it was a different world now. The axis had shifted. Elara's eyes fluttered open, dazed. She looked at Julian, whose gaze was still fixed on her, his expression unreadable but for the faint, protective curl of his lips. Then her eyes slid past him to Mark. And that's when she saw it. Mark Sterling was frozen. Not just still, but utterly, catatonically frozen. His mouth was slightly agape, the smug, triumphant smirk he'd worn just moments before, now slack with disbelief. His eyes, wide and unblinking, were locked on Julian. The colour had drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty, sickly pallor. He looked like a statue, a monument to his own shock. Chloe was no better. Her perfectly made-up face was a mask of horrified confusion. Her hand, which had been resting possessively on Mark's arm, had fallen away, as if she'd been shocked. The silence stretched for an eternity. It was broken by a whispered gasp from a woman who had been passing the gallery entrance. "Oh my God! Is that Julian Croft?" Her friend peered past her. "With Elara Vance? Mark Sterling's ex-wife." The name, spoken aloud, acted like a defibrillator on the stunned onlookers. A low murmur rippled through the crowd that had begun to gather at the edge of the gallery. Suddenly, dozens of eyes were on them, and the name was repeated, whispered from person to person like a secret password. Julian Croft. The name hit Mark Sterling like a physical blow. It was as if he'd been struck by lightning. Julian Croft. Not some low-level academic, not a starving artist. The Julian Croft, the tech visionary, the billionaire recluse who rarely attended social functions. A man whose net worth was so astronomical it made Mark's Midas touch look like amateur finger painting. A man who could buy and sell Mark's entire company with the interest he earned in a week. Mark's brain struggled to process the information. It was impossible. It defied all logic, all the rules of the universe as he understood them. Julian Croft, a man he and his colleagues spoke of with a mixture of awe and terror, was here. And he had just kissed. Elara? Simple, boring, unambitious Elara. The woman he had discarded. The woman he had just publicly pitied and patronized. The woman he had relegated to the background. His world tilted violently. The carefully constructed hierarchy that governed his life, where he was on top and she was at the bottom, crumbled into dust. He looked at Julian Croft, a man of unimaginable power and influence, who was now standing with a protective arm resting lightly on Elara's back. He looked at Elara, who was no longer pale and wounded, but flushed, her eyes shining with a mixture of shock and a dawning, radiant confidence. In that green dress, under the museum lights, she looked luminous. A masterpiece, just as Croft had said. The humiliation was a physical sensation, a white-hot wave that washed over him, searing him from the inside out. Every condescending word he had ever spoken to her, every smug glance he had shared with Chloe, replayed in his mind. But now they were recast in the harsh, unforgiving light of this new reality. He hadn't been punching down at a pathetic ex-wife. He had been performing his petty cruelty for an audience of one of the most powerful men on the planet. He saw the pitying looks from the crowd, the whispers, the smartphones discreetly being raised. He was the fool in the story. He was the punchline. "Mark?" Chloe's voice was a thin, reedy hiss beside him. "Mark? What is happening?" But Mark couldn't answer. He couldn't move. He could only stare, his mind a maelstrom of rage, jealousy, and a profound, soul-crushing bewilderment. He had traded up. He had chosen the glittering, ambitious woman. He had won. That had been the narrative. But as he watched Julian Croft lean down and whisper something in Ilara's ear, making her give a small, genuine laugh, a horrifying realization dawned on him. He hadn't traded up at all. In his blind, arrogant pursuit of what he thought was the prize, he had thrown away the diamond and was left holding a piece of glass. He hadn't won. He had made the biggest, most catastrophic miscalculation of his entire life. And he had done it in front of everyone. The freeze wasn't just shock, it was the complete and total system failure of his soul. Julian saw the feeding frenzy begin, the whispers turning into excited murmurs, the subtle angling of phones. He had made his point, but he had no desire to subject Ilara to the ensuing spectacle. "Let's get out of here," he said quietly, his voice a calm anchor in her sea of confusion. Ilara could only nod, her mind still reeling. Julian kept a steadying hand on her back, guiding her not towards the main exit, but through a side door she hadn't noticed, which led into a private corridor. With a nod to a security guard who instantly recognized him, they were whisked away from the prying eyes of the gala. They emerged into the cool, quiet night of a private courtyard. The air was crisp, and the distant sounds of city traffic were a soothing hum. Ilara took a deep, shuddering breath, leaning against the cold stone of a fountain. I don't know what to say," she began, looking up at him. "Thank you. For what you did in there." "I did nothing but state the truth," Julian said, his expression serious. "His behavior was appalling. No one deserves to be spoken to that way." He paused, his gaze searching hers. "Are you all right?" "I think so," she said, a watery laugh escaping her. "It's just a lot to process. For 3 years I've let his opinion of me live in my head, that I was less than, because my ambitions were different from his. And tonight, you." She trailed off, unable to articulate the monumental shift that had just occurred within her. "He defined your worth by his own narrow, materialistic standards," Julian finished for her. "It's the mistake of a man with a small mind and an even smaller heart. He measures everything in dollars and status because he has no capacity to understand value in any other form, like talent, kindness, or integrity." He then revealed the final piece of the puzzle. "Ilara, I didn't just stumble upon your Instagram. I am one of the primary, albeit anonymous, benefactors of the Boston Botanical Garden Project. Your name came up a few months ago. The head horticulturist mentioned a local florist with an almost supernatural gift for cultivating heritage roses. He said your work was poetry. I looked you up. I saw your designs. He was right." Ilara stared at him, stunned. The Botanical Garden Project was her dream, a place she volunteered at on weekends, a cause she cared about deeply. "So, when I saw your name on the list of potential vendors for this gala, a list I review personally," he continued, "I was hoping I might have the chance to meet you. I never imagined I'd have to do it while playing knight in shining armor." A small, self-deprecating smile touched his lips. "A role I assure you I am not accustomed to." This revelation was more impactful than the kiss. It wasn't a whim. It wasn't a rich man's game. His interest in her was rooted in the very thing Mark had despised, her passion, her talent. It was real. A single, triumphant tear traced a path down her cheek. "He never once came to my shop," she whispered. "Not once." "Then he is a fool," Julian said simply. "And his loss is, if you'll allow it, my gain. Back in the grand hall, the atmosphere had soured for the Sterlings. The whispers followed them everywhere. Mark had finally regained the ability to move, but his face was a thunderous mask of fury. Chloe, for her part, looked utterly mortified. Her social standing, something she and her new money family prized above all else, had just been jeopardized. Being associated with this level of public humiliation was a nightmare. "I cannot believe you did that, Mark," she hissed as they found a secluded corner. "You just had to provoke her. You made a complete fool of yourself. Of us." "How was I supposed to know who he was?" Mark snarled, yanking at his bow tie as if it were choking him. "She's a florist. What is she doing with Julian Croft?" The question was a howl of cosmic injustice. "I don't know, but he made you look like an idiot," Chloe shot back, her voice trembling with rage. "Everyone was watching. The Wentworths, the Barclays. They all saw it. They saw the most powerful man in the city choose her over you. Over me!" Mark's head snapped toward her. "Oh, so this is about you now? This is about your social climbing reputation? This is about the fact that you are obsessed with your ex-wife," Chloe accused, her voice rising. "You couldn't just leave her alone. You had to poke and prod and prove you were better. Well, congratulations, Mark. You just proved the opposite to the entire city." Their perfect, polished facade had shattered. Underneath was a roiling mess of insecurity, ambition, and blame. The argument was vicious and quiet, a venomous exchange in the middle of a party, the foundation of their power couple relationship, built on shared ambition and mutual gain, was proving to be incredibly fragile. It had no room for humiliation. Mark's mind wasn't even on Chloe anymore. It was racing, replaying the scene, obsessing over the implications. Julian Croft. His company was a major player in the tech sector, a sector Mark's firm was heavily invested in. A word from Croft could influence markets, make or break careers. He hadn't just made a social blunder, he might have committed career suicide. And for what? To score a few petty points against the woman he thought he'd left far behind. The irony was so bitter, it tasted like poison. 3 months later, the city was a different landscape for Elara Vance. The story of the gala had become the stuff of local legend. It wasn't just the gossip, it was the aftermath. Julian, true to his word, had seen her talent, and he had no intention of letting it remain in a quaint little shop. With a business investment and strategic guidance from Julian's own team, an offer he had made with no romantic strings attached, framing it as a pure venture capital opportunity in a promising artisan. Bloom and Quill was transformed. Elara was no longer just a shop owner. She was the CEO of Vance Botanical Design. She now operated out of a large, airy studio in the Arts District, managing a small team. She had landed the contract for the Boston Public Library's annual fundraiser and was in talks to handle the floral design for a new chain of boutique hotels. Her work was being featured in design magazines, celebrated for its unique emotional resonance. She was radiant. The constant worry that had shadowed her features was gone, replaced by the confident glow of a woman living her purpose. Her relationship with Julian had deepened, evolving organically from mutual respect into a warm, genuine affection. They had dinner twice a week, attended concerts, and spent quiet Sundays at the Botanical Garden. He valued her mind and her spirit, and in his presence she felt not just seen, but celebrated. One crisp autumn afternoon, Elara was in her new studio, sketching a design for an upcoming wedding, when Sarah dropped by, holding a tablet with a gleeful expression. "You are not going to believe this," Sarah said, sliding the tablet onto the workbench. The headline was from the Boston Finance Monthly, the same publication that had once lauded Mark as a king. Sterling Capital Shakeup. Mark Sterling steps down amidst performance review. The article was couched in polite corporate language, pursuing other opportunities, personal reasons. But Sarah, being a journalist, had the inside scoop. "He's out," Sarah said, barely containing her excitement. "My source at the firm said he's been a mess for months. After the gala, he became obsessed and paranoid. He made a series of reckless trades, trying to prove he was still a big shot. He bet big against one of Croft's subsidiary companies, and it backfired spectacularly. He lost the firm millions. They called it a catastrophic lapse in judgment." Ilara read the words, a strange sense of detachment washing over her. There was no joy, no schadenfreude. There was just a quiet, somber finality. "And what about Chloe?" Ilara asked. Sarah snorted. "Filed for divorce last month, the day his bonus was officially cancelled, according to my source. Her father's company also mysteriously pulled out of a major real estate deal with Mark's firm 2 months ago. It seems the Jensens don't like being associated with bad press and bad bets." So his kingdom had crumbled. The ambitious wife, the high-flying career, the social status, all of it, gone. It had all been a house of cards, and the single gust of wind from that night at the gala had been enough to bring it all down. He had built his life on an image, and when that image was shattered, there was nothing of substance left. Later that evening, Ilara was walking with Julian through a park, the autumn leaves crunching under their feet. She told him the news about Mark. He listened, then stopped, turning to face her. "And how do you feel about that?" he asked gently. Ilara thought for a moment, looking at the vibrant colours of the dying leaves. "I think," she said slowly, "I feel sad for the man he could have been, and profoundly grateful for the woman his leaving allowed me to become." Julian smiled, reaching out to take her hand. His touch was warm and steady. "He looked at you and saw a garden to be paved over," he said. "I looked at you and saw a rare orchid that needed a bigger greenhouse to truly flourish. His blindness was his undoing. But your beauty, Ilara, was always there. It just needed the right light to be seen." Ilara squeezed his hand, her heart full. The ghost of her past life was finally gone. Not banished by revenge, but simply crowded out by the brilliant, beautiful bloom of her present. She was no longer in the background. She was the entire landscape. A year to the day after the Starlight Gala, the air in Boston was crisp with the promise of autumn. But inside the city's magnificent botanical garden, it was perpetually spring. Ilara Vance stood beside Julian Croft, not as a guest, but as the guest of honor. They were in the soaring glass atrium of a newly constructed wing, the Vance Conservatory. After the resounding success of her firm, Julian had made a further endowment to the gardens in her name, and the board, recognizing her immense talent and newfound influence in the world of botanical arts, had insisted on the dedication. The conservatory housed a collection of rare and endangered orchids, a passion project Ilara had personally overseen. She was wearing a simple, elegant navy blue dress, her confidence a quiet aura that needed no announcement. She moved through the crowd of patrons and city officials with an easy grace, Julian a constant, supportive presence by her side. He never overshadowed her. Instead, he seemed to delight in watching her shine. This was her world, her triumph, and he was her most ardent admirer. As the formal dedication ceremony concluded and guests began to mingle, Ilara felt a profound sense of peace. She was surrounded by the literal fruits of her labor, the air thick with the sweet, complex scent of blooming orchids. This was everything Mark had told her was a worthless dream, now realized in glass and steel and living beauty. She was speaking with the museum director when her eyes drifted towards the public entrance of the main conservatory, visible through a glass partition. A man was paying for 2 tickets. He was thicker around the middle than she remembered, and his suit, a generic off-the-rack grey, seemed to hang on him with a kind of weary defeat. His shoulders were slumped. The arrogant, razor-sharp posture of Mark Sterling, the corporate titan, was gone. With him was a woman. She was pretty in a plain, unassuming way, and she watched him with an anxious-to-please expression that Elara knew all too well. He turned, and their eyes met through the glass. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. The polite chatter of the party faded away. It was just her and Mark, separated by a pane of soundproof glass. He saw her. He saw the elegant dress, the confident posture, the man standing beside her. His gaze flickered up to the large bronze plaque on the wall behind her. The Vance Conservatory. Elara watched a complex, painful series of emotions flicker across his face. Shock, disbelief, a deep, hollow shame. It was the look of a man realizing, a year too late, the true scale of his loss. He wasn't just looking at his ex-wife at a party. He was looking at a world he was permanently locked out of, a legacy he had discarded being celebrated right in front of him. He had once called her world small. Now he stood on the outside of it, a common tourist peering into a palace. The woman with him touched his arm, oblivious, and said something, pointing towards a display of ferns. Mark flinched, breaking eye contact with Elara. He gave his date a forced, brittle smile and allowed himself to be led away, deeper into the public gardens, away from the private reception he could not enter. He didn't look back. Julian, who had seen the entire silent exchange, moved to her side. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low. Elara turned away from the glass, her gaze soft and contemplative. The encounter didn't stir anger or even pity. It was like seeing a photograph from a distant past. A man she barely recognized, who had once played a major role in her life. He held no more power over her. He was just an echo. She looked up at Julian, a genuine, serene smile gracing her lips, the kind of smile that comes only when all the old ghosts have finally been laid to rest. "I'm wonderful," she said, and she meant it. She slipped her arm through his, leaning her head against his shoulder for just a moment, a gesture of quiet contentment. "Absolutely wonderful. Now come on. I want to show you the Paphiopedilum Rothschildianum. It finally bloomed this morning." Together, they turned their backs on the glass partition and walked deeper into the warmth and beauty of the conservatory, a space filled with life she had cultivated, a future she had built, and a love that had allowed her to finally, fully, bloom. Elara's story is a powerful reminder that your worth is never defined by who leaves you, but by the strength you find in rediscovering yourself. Mark Sterling saw her passion as a weakness, but it was the very source of her power. He tried to put her in a box, but he never realized she was a force of nature, destined to grow far beyond any walls he could build. Her journey wasn't about getting revenge. It was about reclaiming her narrative and finding someone who could read her language, not just admire the cover of her book. What did you think of Mark's epic miscalculation? Do you believe he got what he deserved, or was his downfall too severe? And what about that incredible moment with Julian Croft? Let us know all your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing from you. If you were moved by Elara's journey from heartbreak to triumph, please show your support by hitting that like button and share this story with someone who might need a reminder of their own worth. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Click that notification bell so you never, ever miss a new story. Thank you for listening.